Artifact power is no longer going to be a thing in World of Warcraft. Hell, we're even getting Legion-like legendaries back, but without the massive RNG acquisition system. We're seeing a focus on class identity over spec identity, and really quite a lot of nice things. I mean, hey, profession items that actually don't have random secondary stats, that's going to be a thing in World of Warcraft Shadow Legends. In fact, all of this stuff is so interesting that I had to bin my initial impressions video because, well, frankly, based on the website and the initial trailer, yeah, things seemed a little bit sparse. But now that the team have actually sat down, they have said a lot of extremely interesting things. And also, we have gorgeous new pins over on Patreon this month. If you'd like to get your own, check that one out. So with that, let's get into World of Warcraft Shadowlands. Now, the first thing that we actually have to do here is quickly explain the lore. So basically, right, the Shadowlands they really are another realm. There's a lot to talk about there, and inside the Shadowlands, which pretty much are infinite, there are different realms. Now, 4 of these realms are the new zones of this expansion, and each one of those 4 realms has with it a covenant. Now, covenants are the main new feature of this expansion, one that they said was sort of a similar scale to something like, say, the garrisons. Now, the lore here is there's a mysterious character, a very old one, basically from the beginning of time, called the Arbiter, and whenever a soul dies, they go to the Arbiter, and the Arbiter works out which one of the different realms do they actually get sent to. So, do they go to Bastion, or maybe another one of the realms? That's how that works, and that's the covenant that soul will go to. Now, there is another zone, one called the Maw. This is an endgame only zone, and well, for mysterious reasons that are key to the expansion story, recently souls have been just sucked into the Maw. Indeed, the souls lost during the battle for Azeroth, they've went to the Maw, and that's where you'll find Sylvanas and the Jailer. Now, with the story of this expansion, because of our connection with Azeroth, we don't get sucked into the Maw. Instead, we go to Oribos, which is the new capital city, and from there we go through our leveling experience, which is initially linear as you go through the 4 zones. And the reason is that they actually want to tell a story across the zones. That's something that they could not do in the past with the Legion and BFA systems. And to be honest with you, I really enjoyed the leveling of Warlords of Draenor, and I think going back to a bit of that model is actually a really good thing. But what's quite nice is that alts, when they level up, they'll be able to do a zone in any order. And what's even more cool is that if you're leveling up an alt in Shadowlands, well, you'll actually have access to endgame features. And that means that while you're leveling your character, you can progress on your end game progression. And that means that your alts will actually hit max level, really having achieved quite a bit indeed. Now, why have I talked about the leveling and the lore here? Well, it's because these covenants are extremely important to the game. Ian described them as being a garrison-like feature in terms of their scope, what he calls a build-around feature, i.e. a feature that really a lot of an expansion is built around. Now, there are 2 really important things with the covenants. So the first major feature of the covenants is 2 active abilities, just one that everyone who joins a covenant will get, and then another one that is dependent on your class. So this will give you really quite a lot of gameplay customization. Now, my worry here is that depending on the permanence and the sort of switching cost of your covenant decision, that, well, you know, you might get sort of pigeonholed into a choice there. But the way that it works is that as you level through the 4 zones, you'll get to try out the Covenant abilities, and then you'll select which Covenant you want to join at the end game. Now, there's another Covenant feature called Soul Binding, and this is essentially your main path of progression once you hit the end game. They were very light in details on that, though. They're going to cover it in the deep dive panel, but basically, that's how the Covenant system works. That's how you get to the Shadowlands, and really that is the framework for the rest of what I'm going to talk about in this video. And yes, that's including things like there being no AP, there being, say, you know, legendaries that I think at least sound like they won't have the acquisition problem of the Legion ones. Really, there is so much to talk about, and what's interesting is that so much of it is directly targeted at criticisms of the game that I know I've been making for years. And the first one we're going to talk about is the changing approach to RNG that Blizzard have. So, I mean, Ian was very, very transparently dunking on the bad examples of RNG in World of Warcraft. Now, one example was professions, right? And he was just talking about how, you know, you craft a staff and just get 2 random secondary stats. Maybe they're the ones that you don't want. Why's it got to be this way? That's literally what he did. The way that it's going to work in this expansion, and this is more something that he said to sort of explain their philosophy, is, yeah, if you craft a staff, well, you'll actually just be able to choose, right? Via basically sort of gems that you use at the time of crafting, you sort of socket them in to choose your secondary stats before you craft the item. That's so much better. He then even talked about their just philosophy for professions, how they want professions to be a bit more meaningful to your endgame gearing. Now, that's something that people have really liked about Classic, so it's lovely to see that actually come over to, I guess, the more modern branch of the game. That's not all, though, with RNG. As another example, he talked about the weekly chest. Now, this got quite a lot of applause, because, like, he talked about the weekly chest and basically said it's rubbish. And, I mean, yeah, he's right. He talked about how it really just ends up being a constant source of disappointment, and he offered a bit of an example. How about there was a system that took all that you had done in a week, right, sort of smartly worked that out, and gave you a choice, you know, instead of just giving you one item that you're probably going to be disappointed with, gave you a choice of 6 items. And what if you just got to choose the item you wanted out of that pool? So that vastly would increase the chances of you getting an item that you want, and I think would feel a bit more fair, and there'd be a bit more agency in terms of the slots and things that you actually select there. And he also said that, say, what if in addition to those, 6 items, there was also a sort of a backup, right? Something you could choose if you didn't want any of those 6 items. And I really think that is, I mean, that's just an example. He was very clear to say that this is in development, but that player agency is one of the most important, like, guidelines, North Stars for them when they're developing this expansion. And that's kind of basically an example of where the weekly chest idea was and what a version of that would look like with their more modern philosophy. And I've got to say, that is really great. So far, it seems like this is going to be respecting the time of the player a lot more. And really, on the topic of respecting the time of the player, I think we've got to talk about artifact power, because he said, right, that, yeah, there are benefits to always having something to progress towards, but then he said that, well, you know, you're also going to feel really pressured to do things like your weekly checklist and all that. And because of that, he said, no AP. And I don't think I've actually heard anything this BlizzCon that has got so much of a cheer from the audience than this artifact power announcement. And I think that, I mean, that really, really is an interesting thing. Now, he talked about, you know, there being like a lot of customization rewards from the various different covenants. And I've got to say that if you're getting, you know, more of your rewards are coming from sort of things you really just get because you want to play the game and you want to get that reward versus things that you feel like you're pigeonholed into doing, I've got to say, that would make me far more likely to play World of Warcraft on a far more regular basis. I mean, right now with BFA, I hate the RNG gear, and I just couldn't be bothered with artifact power progression. And if those things are, you know, if one of those is gone and the other one is more reasonable, yeah, I could see myself properly playing WoW and how I really know I do want to. So that sounded very good indeed, but that's not all. There is just more good news here. On the topic of classes, he said they're focusing on class identity, not spec identity. That is a change from the Legion model. He even said that Helinka tomorrow is going to be giving the talk, and that, his joke nickname is Helinka the Unpruner. He said that old abilities are going to come back and that some other abilities will be available across all specs of a class. And that's going to mean that, you know, I mean, if you look at Classic, right, it doesn't say Frost Mage, it says Mage, and you're whatever blend of Mage you want to be. Now, the spec system still is going to exist, but this does seem like a far better direction for the classes of World of Warcraft. So count that, I think, as another big conceptual win. And really, for all these things, I'm going to say conceptual win, because we don't know if it's a solid win yet. We've got to see how it's going to be implemented, but it is important to talk about the philosophy and them just having player agency slapped all over their slides. Ian constantly being fairly anti-extreme RNG. That is all really good stuff that does contrast a lot of what we've heard. We didn't hear him talk about, you know, like moments of excitement in regards to RNG. And again, with the new legendaries, that's another example. I'll cover them more fully in a bit, but they are acquired seemingly through a pretty darn direct source, not an RNG-like one. He talked about how the Legion legendaries, 99% of the feedback was about their acquisition, but that they were really fun when you got them. But they'd say it sucked if you're the Fire Mage with Pyrdaz, or Prydaz, whatever, and, the other Fire Mage has a really good one, and then, yeah, you're going to be really sad, especially because there's nothing you could have done to specifically get the thing you wish you had, because that's how the Legion legendaries worked. And again, that's just them saying all the right things. We need to see what action that translates into, yes, but it certainly does sound good. Then we've also seen the agency idea being applied to leveling, and this is also where I've got to cover the level squish. So yeah, there's a level squish. You'll have a level cap of 60 in this expansion, and all existing characters, all 120 characters basically, will be level 50 once the expansion drops. Now, there's two different categories of leveling here. There's your leveling when you're actually in the Shadowlands content that I described earlier, where it's a linear leveling experience that is telling a linear story. Now, for me, that's great, because what do I want? I want a really good campaign that is well paced, right? And if you're just telling 4 side stories that are sort of connected but can be done in any order, I mean, that does kill, say, being able to do a 3-act structure for your, expansion-wide narrative. That will let them do that. I'm really happy about that. But, in line with player agency, well, if you kick on, start an alt, right? What do? You can do any zone in any order, you can progress along the endgame content, and because you probably already know what's up with the Covenant system, well, yeah, you can just pick your Covenant at level 50 and, do your Covenant content as you're leveling up. And then as for the Covenants, well, each one of those has its own endgame campaign. So Battle for Azeroth had the endgame campaigns for the Alliance and the Horde. In this expansion, you're going to have it for each of the 4 Covenants. So I imagine that's going to be pretty good for people who, are doing alts. And again, doing alts seems to be a lot more possible in this expansion. Ian talked about that idea quite a bit, and with there being, say, no artifact power, it does seem like it's going to be a lot more of an alt-friendly experience, which again, I think is a good thing. Now, let's talk about alts in the context of just regular leveling. So that's going to be pretty different. You've got a level cap of 50. The current talent trees are compressed into that. We're just going to have to wait and see if there's anything else in terms of reward for those levels. Hopefully there is, but we're just going to, we'll just have to wait and see. Now, what's pretty cool there is the first time you level up through the game, it's a bit more traditional from what I gather, but for alts, you can just select, this is so cool, you can just select a continent, right? You could select Pandaria, and you could quest through all of Pandaria, and that would take you from level 1 to 50, at which point you go to Shadowlands. You could choose Northrend. If you really love a bit of punishment, you could choose Outland. Point is there's a bit more agency. Now, it seemed like, with the way that he was talking, that leveling experience is also going to be faster. And that, again, is another really darn good thing. Plus, they're also revamping the new player experience with a zone for new players. And that zone supposedly is going to show off the more modern features of World of Warcraft, which, I mean, I think it is a bit odd, right? You've got to make this new zone that players start in to show off your new features, then send them into the old content. But, they know what the new stuff's going to be like. I mean, it's a bit of an odd problem, but pragmatically, I think that's a decent solution to it for World of Warcraft. It's certainly, I think, going to make getting your friends into the game a bit better, and I mean, World of Warcraft is a game that probably should be played with friends. And then also in line with the idea of player agency, well, character customization is way better, and there's actually one feature that I'm really happy about. So for humans, you can actually choose races, like, the ones that we've got in the real world. So yeah, that's good. I mean, the way that Ian framed it was, yeah, you can play a character that looks vaguely like you, and I think that's a really good thing. That's a good customization option, and I mean, frankly, just having skin colors on the base faces where it just it's a bit of a weird mismatch. It doesn't really look that good. It's just great to see that actually be in the game. So that's pretty cool. Then also for the other races in the game, I suppose you've got similar things, right? So humans from different parts of the world look different. Turns out, well, dwarves from different parts of the world might look different too. Same goes for the trolls. Everyone's basically getting that same treatment. If you want to be a Bronzebeard style dwarf, you can do that. If you want to be a Wildhammer, you can do that. If you want to be a sand troll, you can be a sand troll, forest troll, jungle troll. Way more options. For the undead, do you want bones showing or not? You can choose that. Now, it seems like that's a work in progress system, but overall, that customization is good, and it is sorely needed in World of Warcraft. I mean, Ian did joke about, you can finally, for the trolls, choose a different eye color to your character's face because it's 2020 and we're going to have the technology, which, I mean, yeah, that's a bit of a poke at themselves, but I think one that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, that's just a really good feature. Hopefully we see a lot more of that as time goes on. So overall, it's kind of funny. There's no island expeditions, there's no war fronts, right? There's none of those kind of features they're just throwing in seemingly for the sake of it, but it seems like they're redoubling on making the core parts of World of Warcraft good. Now, there is one new feature that's a bit more spicy, and that's Torghast, which initially starts off being kind of like a pretty cool sort of mirror to Icecrown, which you literally see in the cinematic, so that's pretty cool, but you make your way up, you see more and more enemies. The enemies look really cool, and it's a roguelite experience. So at points, when you go through that, you'll be able to choose anima power-ups. Now, I didn't really explain anima. Basically, every soul has anima, and, you could be a really strong soul that's evil and have loads of anima, or a really strong soul that's good and have loads of anima. And that's kind of like the life force, the lifeblood of the Shadowlands. So you get these anima powers, which are basically seem to be augmentations of your existing abilities. Really strong ones that basically mean you can have a super advanced, super fast progression curve as you're going up Torghast. And that essentially every run will feel slightly different. It really does seem to be inspired by roguelike games, and it's available in a 1 to 5 player format. And for me, that sounds great. I talked about how the horrific visions for me testing them out in 8.3, doing them solo, I loved it. Like, you know, I saw Preach's video where he was kind of just saying, you can go through it with 5 people, and when you die, you just get resurrected. And I kind of thought, wow, you know, my experience soloing that, where everything mattered, and when I died, that felt like really good video game, like gameplay, right? Whereas, you know, Mike's experience, well, it just sounds like nothing mattered. So there's a little bit of a worry there in terms of the balance, but I'll certainly say that, you know, jumping into a solo challenge where it's sort of me versus my past self, a little bit like with the Mage Towers of Legion, I think that could be a really, really darn cool experience. So overall, what my thoughts are, I do have a few concerns though. Like, I am concerned about the permanence of your Covenant choice and that like impacting your class stuff. In terms of the classes, you know, the soul binding, we'll have to see how that goes. There are big ifs there. What I will say is that, sort of in the, you know, the World of Warcraft battle of ideas, I think it's mostly a big win, right? We are seeing more player agency being talked about, less RNG, no artifact power. I mean, philosophically, the flip there in the team's decision-making seems to be pretty darn good. So, you know, it's tentative. We'll need to wait for the deep dive panel to see more, but I'll tell you what, right now, maybe I'm not 100% for Sylvanas' deep involvement, but in terms of the gameplay systems, the zones, the lore of the zones, which all looked, God, like the zones just look gorgeous. I mean, bar the Nax looking one, I mean, it's just the skirt stuff if you want that, but overall, seems like a gorgeous world, seems like they're just making good philosophical changes, and that could be the core of long-term saving WoW, is those changes in design philosophy, and I'm extremely happy to see the team admit that so publicly up on stage. So there you go, that's it for my initial impressions. There'll be a lot of content tomorrow though when we're really going into the deep dive. Of course, if you would like to come away with some loot once the month is done, well, we're upgrading the Patreon. Yes, there's going to be the usual art pack. It's going to be for the Demon Hunter this month, but you're also going to get a pin. This is our first run of pins. Absolutely gorgeous. I'm so happy with how it came out, so you can check that out too. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. Please tell me what you think about this expansion down below. I'd love to know. And with that, I'll see you next time.